it's mentally. I mean, like with my brain injury, I had paralysis on half my body because of the injury to my left side of my brain. Sure, that was hard to overcome, that physical aspect. I'm sure you may have experienced some of that physical aspect too. But for me, I think it's the mental piece that we have to be in the right mindset, because that is what motivates us to get out of bed in the morning.
I'm Jamie Mo Crazy, and you're listening to Life Gets Mo Crazy, where we'll hear from people who either been through a trauma or helped someone else through. Listen and learn strategies you can implement in your life, so when a metaphorical avalanche slides you down the mountain of life, you can climb an alternative peak with the best view. I'm here today with Darcy Keith, and on September 12th, 1991, her life changed in the blink of an eye when she became the only survivor in the back seat of a car hit by a semi-tractor trailer. Oh my gosh, that's such a crazy experience. So Darcy, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for being here.
Well, thank you, Jamie, so much for having me. I'm really excited to be on your podcast.
Yeah, I'm really excited you're here. So let's start out by talking about what it was like from you when your life changed in the blink of an eye.
Well, when we're in college, we do things that we may not have decided we want to do. Well, I did. I skipped class on that September 12th, and I went to another college with some of my sorority sisters to start a chapter of our sorority. And who would have thought that on our way back to Ball State, which is about a 5-hour drive, that we would be hit by a semi. So the driver of our car lost control of it in the windshield of a passing semi. So when she felt like our car was being sucked under the trailer from the windshield, we were yelling, and because we thought we were going to collide. So she spun the car and jerked the car to get away from the semi, and it spun and landed in the middle of the road. A third semi saw us but couldn't stop in time, and so he aimed for the trunk. And when he did, he climbed up on top of it, crushing to death my sorority sister behind the passenger. The one in the middle of the back seat was flipped upside down and died of a broken neck. The driver and the front seat passenger were both buckled in seatbelts, and they walked away with minor injuries. As for me, I was sitting behind the driver, and because we were hit this way, it threw my head in the side window and then into the front seat. I was like a human palm ball. I was unrestrained. So that's why I was the only survivor in the back seat, even though none of us were restrained. I'm just very fortunate and happy to still be here. So that's how life can change in an instant when you don't at least expect it.
Yeah, and it changed in an instant. And 1991 is a year older than me, so it's been a long period of time, and you're still involved in the brain injury world. But let's discuss part of your initial rehabilitation, like what happened then, and some changes that you've seen in the development of brain injury.
So when I was injured, neuroplasticity wasn't a thing. It was kind of like you only recovered like within 2 years, and that's all you're going to recover. Um, I I was an actuarial science major, and if you know what actuaries do, they're kind of like math nerds. So they brought my calculus book. I was a senior, and I just completed an internship with an insurance company that promised me a job. So I kind of want to give you some background or some backstory as to what happened prior to my crash. So with my left injury, I lost memory of my entire actuarial science major. So when they brought my book to the hospital, I just did not know what it was, or didn't. I knew I had read it and I had studied it, but I didn't know the content of it any longer. So that was particularly frustrating. And getting myself back on track, I did. Once I was discharged from the hospital, I went back to Ball State, which is where I went to college, and I switched my major to insurance. So I finished that major, and when I graduated, I went back to that insurance company. Instead of putting me back in the actual role, they put me in a different position, and I went through like a neuropsych to see what I could do, what I couldn't do. and I couldn't do any, of course, any of the actuarial things. So they put me in an underwriting job, and I did that for a while. And slowly, I worked my way, and I kept engaging myself cognitively every day. And because of that, I am now I'm a business analyst for Liberty Mutual. And I have actually been in the insurance business since I got out of college because the company invited me and and again hired me back. So I've been working in the insurance business for that long and still am. And then I'm doing a job that they told me I would never be able to do. And so because neuroplasticity and the brain rewires, and like with my injury, I had a brain bleed and it was in the right frontal lobe. And so when I had my brain mapped, you can see where the neurons reconnected around that hole in my brain from the brain bleed. So it is great because my husband was present when the doctor told me that he's like, it's a miracle, it rewired itself. So he got to hear that, which was kind of nice. But that's what's changed in the last 30 years is that neuroplasticity has really come to light that a lot of things the brain rewires itself. So that was very helpful for me.
Yeah, my older sister actually went to Georgetown Medical School about 20 years ago. And she was taught that neuroplasticity only happened in the cortical stages of development, which are the first 2 years of life or first 2 years post accident. And so we were all kind of under the understanding that your brain could only rewire itself for periods of time. And now we are doing more and more research to show that it can rewire at any time in your life, which I think is really helpful for a lot of brain injury survivors who are still struggling on many things. Like you sound like you're climbed an alternative peak and you're doing amazing. But the exciting thing is that you can be 30 years post your accident and still healing. And that's a brand new concept. It's not a brand new concept, but in some places it is brand new because the narrative and the understanding around brain injury, we're still stuck in that time period of you have this amount and this is your diagnosis and this is what's going to happen instead of the understanding that it can evolve and change, which is so fascinating to me and why we're actually in a really cool brain injury time right now because lots of legislation and policies and things are starting to change with an understanding that if you give more rehabilitation up front for longer than 1 or 2 years, because I don't know what stage you were at 2 years, but I was not back to who I am today. It was still
Yeah.
noticeably different at 2 years. um
Yes, me
so
too.
yeah, that belief that it's over at 2 years, however you are. I know some individuals who were in a wheelchair at 2 years post and are now walking independently. So
Mhm.
keep climbing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And not just the physical aspect. Again, it's the mental aspect and it's the little things. So, like for example, I did graduate and I'm working for an insurance company, but to challenge my brain, I made sure, or I wanted to achieve that peak like you're talking about, and I wanted to take the exams to take the pinnacle professional designation in the property casualty insurance industry. So this is the international designation that is thought of when you hear the insurance industry, that peak. And it took me 25 years to do that. And there's 8 exams, and it first started out and it was essay exams, and that was pretty crazy and that was hard to do. But again, towards the end, it got to be multiple choice because of over time they reformulated, recalculated, and did different things to the exams. And I was able to graduate in 2018 with that designation, and that
Oh,
was
congratulations.
the peak. That I mean, it was this designation was symbolic of all the achievements. In fact, out of over 1,000 designees, they selected me as a class spokesperson because, again, that
Oh,
you're talking about that
wow.
perseverance, that determination, that this is at the peak. This is the goal that you want to achieve. And even though it took me 25 years, like you said, way back when you couldn't do it, I slowly, life happens to us. That's just a given, right? But you're right. You can reach that ultimate peak if just keep plugging away. And one thing I think that you pointed that was really really good, Jamie, is that a brain injury is chronic. It's dynamic. It changes. So that's why it is important for legislation to reflect that. That establishing that brain injury is a chronic disease, which will allow us again maybe more therapies that last longer through our lifetime. It's not just something like hypertension that says, "Hey, here's your medication, take it and you're good." That doesn't happen. Or diabetes, you constantly have to be that's a lifelong care. Same thing with a brain injury, and that's why I'm so excited that legislation and is being searched for that, and also there's a research grant out there that research is being done for that.
Yeah, and you do a lot of motivational speaking as well. And so you have a secret formula to overcoming adversity so you can live your best life. Let's talk about
Yeah.
that.
Sure, sure. It is as you mentioned, my secret formula, and it's actually an acronym. It's STEPS. So the first stands for surrender, let go, what you can't control. So, like in this car crash, I couldn't control the driver of our car. I couldn't control the fact that a semi hit us. I can control my state, but what I could control was how I reacted to it, how I was able to accept. And when I talk about accepting, I'm not saying, hey, this everything's all roses or anything like that. What I'm saying by accepting is that okay, this happened to me, and I can't control it, so I need to surrender it, and I need to just acknowledge that. So that I think is the first thing, and the second is the T. It's try not to play the victim attitude. So the poor me, I could say, you know what, the truck driver hit me. He ruined my life. He took everything from me. He killed two of my friends. But playing the victim doesn't get us anywhere, and it's not in a positive mindset. So it's getting into that mindset, which is actually the E. It's exemplify a positive attitude. So just having a positive attitude when you accomplish or when you try different things, sure, it may not happen the first time, but it might the second or the third. It's just keeping the positive attitude, being resilient, to want to live your best life. And which leads to the P is persevere with fortitude and determination. You've probably experienced a lot of this, Jamie, with your persevering through it and accomplishing all that you have because you've done so much too. It's just persevering with that fortitude and determination, and that's that strength. It's that motivation. Like, hey, I want to be the best version of myself that I can. And sometimes that may look different, and we may want to get back to that old us. But as individuals who've experienced brain injury, most of us aren't going to be exactly like we were. I'm not exactly like I was before I was injured.
I don't
Go ahead.
think anyone can be exactly who they were
No.
before their brain injury, and that's why it's a life-changing trauma and a life-changing
Mhm.
experience. Because on the opposite side of things, when you have a baby, a lot of people
Yeah.
want to have a baby, but they're not going to be exactly who they were before the baby. So instead of trying to get back to exactly who you were before your
Mhm.
brain injury, look at your new opportunities. And I've
Yes.
spoken with some survivors who find new aspects of their identity and who they are that they can flourish and grow that they didn't
Mhm.
even pay attention to before. So it doesn't have to necessarily be worse after your brain injury, but you're not going to
Mhm.
get back to exactly who you were. That's why I say Jamie 2.0.
That's right. Yes, and you're exactly right. We're not going to be, but you know what? You're right with the opportunities because had I stayed where I was, and I had been an actual science major, I am now not that I'm an underwriter. I'm a business analyst, and I love it. If I went back to the same person, I wouldn't enjoy that. So you're right. We can flourish. We can do a lot of things, and new opportunities. So that leads me to the last S, and that specifically asks for help.
Mm.
So with these new opportunities, we can ask for help, and and there are a lot of folks out there that will help us. So, have you ever, and I know you probably have, Jamie, when you're looking for a website or looking up something you're in Google or you're in Chrome, you type in as specific as you can. Like you don't say, I want to make dinner tonight. Let's see, I want to make spaghetti, and you can go through and the recipes like spaghetti, and then there's this and there's that variation. But the furthest you can drill down, you'll get to your answer better. So it's just like a web browser. You specifically ask for help, and be as specific as you can, because that will drill down to what you actually are looking for.
Yeah. And I feel like a lot of survivors and also family caregivers who are taking care of
Mhm.
them, especially in the acute stages, so like the
Mhm.
immediacy after the trauma, neither one of them feel comfortable asking for help. Like one of the situations that we talk about is if you are struggling mowing your lawn and one of
Mhm.
your neighbors wants to help you, they don't know how to ask you if you need help, and you don't know how to ask them if you need help. So that's one of the big things is
Mhm.
people feel ashamed of asking for help. But it's
Mhm.
one of the biggest amazing things in life is that most people want to help, and
Mhm.
if you are specific and you ask directly, they will either help or they'll say, I can't do that. Here's somebody who can. But if you
Yes.
never ask, then you never will be able to receive.
Mhm. You're absolutely right. You hit the nail right on the head.
And so, speaking of behaviors that you developed, what were two or a few of brain healthy behaviors that you can develop to help manage your brain injury if you're talking to somebody else who's a survivor?
So one thing that I know that our brains need is it needs oxygen. Now we can do that through exercise, or we can also help our brain reset, and that's at sleep, during sleep at night. So my brain, I have trouble shutting it down at night. It's like, cable TV with all the channels on at the same time, and it's hard to calm it. So I do several different things with my brain healthy behavior. I have to wear an eye mask. I have to have a white noise machine on. And I just have to be in a kind of a quiet, cool room. So there's just some different things that I have to have. Sleep is super important to have a brain healthy behavior. Exercise is a good brain healthy behavior. Now, I must admit, sometimes I am really tired after working all day. Is to get up and be motivated to do something. So I get on the treadmill every evening, and I get that little brain recharge, because oxygen helps your brain. It feeds your brain, and that's pretty important too. So make sure you get enough sleep. Exercise if you can, and also it's important to make sure that you eat the right foods, because it's the saying, you are what you eat. So if you're eating junk food, your brain may not function as well as it should. So, eating properly is very important as well.
Yeah, and that's another interesting protocol change that has developed over roughly the past decade is when people get concussions, which are mild traumatic brain injuries, instead of being recommended to go into a dark room and turn the lights off and not move, they're actually now the recommendation is to go for walks. Obviously you don't want to overstimulate yourself, so you still have to
Mhm.
be wary of that, and it's recommended still to not watch TV, but if you go on walks, it adds that oxygen flowing throughout your
Mhm.
bloodstream up to your brain, versus if you're
Mhm.
just sitting there in the still and you're not moving, then you have no oxygen going to your brain, and the oxygen helps your brain recover
Mhm.
so well. So that's something that's really exciting about all this new research with brain injury.
A couple other brain healthy behaviors, and these are a couple of things that two things I think for a person to become the best version of themselves, and I've given this in keynote talks, is to be socially and cognitively engaged. And what I mean by that, socially, is being out with other people, interacting with other people, and whether that be a restaurant, whether that be a support group, whether that be a church, but just being out with people and engaging with people. And the second was intellectually or cognitively engaged. And that does not mean you have to go read a book or you have to take a college course or anything like that. That is nothing like that at all. Just intellectually or cognitively engaged, just trying something new. If you put on your shoes one way, or 1 foot, do switch feet and try the other one first. Or if you brush your teeth, try it one way or do it the next, or brush it at night instead of in the morning. Something, of course, for me, I would need to have a post-it note to remind myself, but do something different to cognitively engage your mind. So those are two other things I think are really important for individuals who've experienced brain injuries to be cognitively and socially engaged.
Yeah, and for cognitively engaged, there's so many little apps now. Like I do
Mhm,
Duolingo every night, which is a language learning app.
mhm,
And
mhm.
my husband's side of the family is Portuguese, and so we're learning Portuguese.
Oh, all
And
right.
we've done it in French and Spanish. But we are going to Portugal this summer, so we're gonna try to see if any of it actually helps or we can hear. But the biggest thing that I was really excited about when we started doing this Duolingo is exactly what you're saying, like challenging yourself all the time. Sometimes it is really productive. Like I went back to university and I think it was one of the
Mhm,
most helpful things I did to have somebody judge me. And even though on finals week, I was like, this is crazy that I want to get graded. Like, no, but to be able to learn how to set goals and accomplish
mhm,
things, because something else you pointed out, you have to do a post-it note. That's awesome, because if you learn things about yourself instead of just thinking, oh, I can't remember that, I'm not going to do it, this is my
mhm,
failure, failure, failure. There's so many things you can fail in life. Like even if you don't have
mhm,
a brain injury, there's so
mhm,
many different struggles that you can have. So if you have a brain injury, some of the struggles are repetitive and you're like, okay, I don't have great short-term memory. So
mhm,
I will make reminders to myself. Now, I think at this point, my short term memory is pretty similar to everyone else's in my family. But they always say that I am the best at remembering because I've learned how to make reminders and put things in my calendar and
mhm,
do everything. So whenever you see
mhm,
struggles, and it's like that for everything in my life now, whether it's related to my brain injury or just being a human, it's one of the biggest gifts we can have from our brain injury is that now we
mhm,
can say, okay, I'm not going to remember that. Here's what I have to do. And
mhm,
others can learn from you. Like my husband
mhm.
does it too. Like we put reminders on each other's phones to remind each other to set something. Like if we know we're going to keep forgetting things. But one of the great things about brain injury is when you are recovering, you can learn techniques and ways to
Mhm,
memorize.
mhm. Yeah, I think that's a great way, whether it's sending reminders. I definitely use um, my iPhone to do all sorts of things and to just and I save things in different areas, and I save things in multiple areas, so that way, like logically, I think, oh well, this should go here, and then it's not there, and so I put things in different places to help me remember. Again, it's just techniques that you learn that I learn, whether it's post-its, whether it's whatever cues that you want to help you remember to do things like turn the lights on, turn living room off. Just whatever cues work, and it's just finding that cue that works for you.
Yeah. And you mentioned social interaction. Did you
Mhm.
have any um, specific challenges right after your injury with social interactions?
Oh, did I? So you're talking about the overstimulation. So my first pass, I got a hospital was 2 hours. So my family, my extended family lives in Indianapolis, and my immediate family didn't. So when I was in Indianapolis hospital, they would come up. They took me to my extended family. and my cousin bowled. So we went into a bowling alley, and I mean, I hear pins and bowling balls, crash, crash, and and there was so much activity that I had to leave. My brain it freaked out, and so I'm like, I had to leave, and I got kind of agitated because it was just too much for my brain to handle. So that was one thing that I learned right away, is that too much stimulation caused me to have difficulties. So I've had to learn to do that over time. So one thing that I did to help with that was I got Pacer tickets, Indiana Pacer tickets. And being a single woman, I got the cheap seats, which were up high. So I went up, when you could pick your seat, I went up to the seat. Of course, the arena is empty. And with my vertigo, it was a little bit challenging for me, but it was fine. So once I picked my seat, then once the arena filled, during the games, that helped me with my stimulation, with my brain learning to overcome and just to adapt. Now, sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. Um, like for example, I will never get my actual or my math back. So some of us may not be able to be in that stimulation environment again, and that's okay. But for me, this is what worked for me to help me get back to being in an environment like that.
Yeah. And sometimes your neuroplasticity takes many, many years. And
Mhm.
sometimes it's not worth it to go through all that. And
Mhm.
sometimes
Yeah.
you do want to do it. Like an example is I was a very avid reader as a child. I loved reading. And after my brain injury, reading hurt my head. And I didn't really like it. And I did go back to university, but I never read for fun. Um,
Mhm.
but then for me, in my situation, when COVID hit, all of a sudden I had a lot of extra free time. And
Mhm.
so I would set a timer on my phone for 20 minutes every other day. And I would
Mhm.
read for 20 minutes every other day. And for the first like 4 months it wasn't fun, and then all of a sudden I realized I was wanting to keep reading after the 20 minutes were up, and then I realized I did get back my joy of reading, and now I'm a
Mhm.
really avid reader again, so I really enjoyed it. But like you
That's
said,
awesome.
sometimes it doesn't happen, and sometimes it's not worth it. Like it's, you might not think it's worth it to put in all that time and energy, and that's just fine. Just
Mhm.
because you don't like something, or I can add on to that, reading in the car hurts and it's not fun.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I don't know if I will ever be able to read again in the
Mhm.
car. And
Mhm.
I'm not really too concerned about it, to be honest.
Mhm. No.
I never
Right.
had any issues reading in the car before my brain injury. Um, Reading, I really wanted to get back to, but reading in the car, I don't care so much. So I'm not
Mhm.
forcing myself every other day to practice reading in the car. Um, because after a
Yeah.
brain injury, we can recover some and we can change some stuff. I know that I've actually gotten much more organized and clean because of all the therapies that I did focused on that.
Mhm.
So you can pick and choose what you really
Mhm.
want to work on.
So it's funny you mentioned about reading, Jamie, because with these professional designations, I'm talking books like this thick. Well, like you, I didn't like reading after my injury, and I had a few more exams to take. But what I did was I found a company that did videos. So, and one thing that helped me was, even though I didn't like reading, visual and audio. So I could visually see it and I can audibly hear it. So the more senses I involved, the better I retained it. But I like that better than I liked reading. So I don't read as much as I probably should, because sometimes it's like when I read a page, I'm like, what did I just read? It's hard to me for me to focus on that. But I can watch a video and it can help me retain it a lot better. So what works for somebody else may not work for me, or vice versa. So if somebody decides, or a person with a brain injury decides that, hey, I don't like this, there may be another avenue to reach the same goal. That, whether it be watching video or whether it be listening to a podcast, one of your awesome podcasts where they can get some information. Different things work for everybody.
Exactly. And my little sister actually has neurodivergence, not from a brain injury, but neurodivergence means her eyes focus above the words. So she
Okay.
can't really read. It's not fun for her. It's never going to
Mhm.
change. So she listens to audiobooks. And that doesn't have anything to do with her education or ability level. And that's one of the
Mhm.
amazing things about living right now is that there's so much diversity in your ability level. It's kind of
Mhm.
just because you are a straight A student in college does not mean that you are the smartest person. It's great to do that. I mean, I'm kind
Mhm.
of one of those like really good grades, ambitious types of people, but Jeannie
Mhm.
has never really been as focused on education and focused on schooling aspect, but we both have different forms of intelligence and we are
Mhm.
both incredibly smart. And so after you've had a brain injury, just because you can't do one aspect, like you
Mhm.
couldn't regain your math skills that you previously had, does not mean that you are not a competent woman.
Absolutely. No, I think you bring out some great points.
So, what are some tips that you have learned throughout your whole life, um, being a brain injury survivor and also just being a human, um,
Mhm.
to be happier in rebuilding your new identity and
Mhm.
focusing on the basics of life and being happy on a day to day
Mhm.
basis?
Well, that's a great question. And when I was talking to a bunch of athletic directors, they talked about sports injuries. And is it the actual injury physically or is it mentally? And I think with us as individuals who've experienced brain injury, it's mentally. I mean, like with my brain injury, I had paralysis on half my body because of the injury to my left side of my brain. Sure, that was hard to overcome, that physical aspect. I'm sure you may have experienced some of that physical aspect too. But for me, I think it's the mental piece that we have to be in the right mindset because that is what motivates us to get out of bed in the morning. I was just grateful to be able to get out of bed and to go into the bathroom and just rather than having to wear adult diapers. Just things like that. Once you've lost things or regaining it back, you're having that grateful mindset really helped me live my best life. So any little thing I would get back or that I would be able to do that I may not have been able to do the day before. I'm just grateful for that. And I think, again, it's having a grateful, positive attitude and being open to asking for help and opening to bettering yourself, being intellectually and socially engaged. All those different things allow me to live my best life every day.
Yeah, and it sure sounds like you're living an amazing life and climbing an alternative peak. And one of
Mhm.
the things that I really hope that people listening to you can learn is that they can live a great life because like
Mhm.
you mentioned, so much of it comes from your mental. And
Mhm.
if you're in the hospital like I was, and I actually had brainstem damage, so I was paralyzed
Mhm.
on half my body as
Mhm.
well. And some of my doctors were fantastic, but some of them were telling my parents and family caregivers, this is going to be the diagnosis, this is going to be the outcome. She will never do
Mhm.
this again. She will never walk again. She'll
Mhm.
never ski again. Most people are going to listen because they're super educated and they're going to believe it. And so if they have the
Mhm.
mindset that they're never going to do it again, they're never going to recover, that is not an opportunity, then it's going to come true. they're never
Mhm.
going to be able to
Mhm.
recover. They're never going to be able to grow, because one of the most important things with a mindset is just the belief you can do it. Like,
Mhm.
so many world records and things that have broken through, like the 4-minute mile. It took years and years to do the 4-minute mile. And the next year, 6 people did the 4-minute mile because
Mhm.
they had the belief that they could do it.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that's one of the big things I'd love the audience who's listening to this podcast to take away. I feel like to take away from listening to you, that having that belief and
Mhm.
feeling grateful for everything that you do accomplish. So every night, maybe write in a journal, write in your phone, but just acknowledge your accomplishments of
Mhm.
the day and have the belief that you can accomplish even more things tomorrow.
Mhm. Now, I do want I totally agree with you, and I do that three things every night before I go to bed. I'm grateful for three things, but I want to caution other people that when you try these things, make sure it is in a safe environment. Make sure that either somebody is with you, or to if you need help. Um, like I like roller coasters. I don't know about you, but I like roller coasters. And with my vertigo from my brain injury, I can't do them like I used to. So I mean, I have my family there to remind me, hey, are you sure you want to do that? I'll be like, oh yeah. I just need to be reminded that I really, really want to do it and I want to go for it, but I have to do that in a safe environment to make sure that I stay safe. So just kind of think about that when, or whoever's listening to this, think about that when you try to do something that, hey, you can. It's great, and I encourage folks to try that, but just make sure that it's in a safe environment.
Yeah, and definitely communication with those
Hmm.
around you. Um, hey, I'm trying something new.
Hmm.
I might need some support in this. And also
Hmm.
understanding that with all the new things you're trying, it's not always easy. And sometimes it's not worth it to do it. But if it is something you want to push through and you want to keep trying, like I mentioned, it took months and months of every other day reading to see any change for me. So
Hmm.
it doesn't happen immediately. And so if you
Hmm.
have ideas, you can keep trying them, but don't be too hard on yourself if you miss a day or you were planning on doing something and you don't get it done, because all these advice ultimately comes down to living your best life and being
Hmm.
the happiest version of you. Because
Hmm.
everybody who survived from a brain injury, the amazing thing is we survived. We are
Hmm.
here. We are alive. So we have the opportunities to create our life. And it's different for each person. So
Hmm.
whether you take the steps and everything, just always remember, when you're everything you're trying to do and change and fix and all these busy things, to take deep breaths and just let it be.
Hmm. I think that's some great advice.
Well, we're reaching the end of our podcast. If some of the listeners want to contact you, what is your website, and how do you get in touch with them?
Sure, I would love for people to get in touch with me. They can go through my website, and it's just my name. It's www.darcykeith.com, and that's spelled DarcyKeith.com. My email is listed on my website. My phone number is listed on my website. Feel free to call me, text me, or even if you forget my website name, just Google me, Darcy Keith, and it should come up at the top. So look forward to hearing everybody from everybody. And yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, and thank you so much for coming to join. I know I keep hearing about you and your name, Darcy, it just pops up all the time connected to brain injury. So I think it's pretty admirable that you have stayed in the brain injury community for such a long time.
It's I stay in the community because it is my passion to help others achieve their best lives and help them through the things that I've learned. Because 32 years ago, brain injury, the thought of brain injury was like my dad thought I'd be in a vegetative state. there wasn't as much education out there about brain injury or maybe even research. So I've experienced a lot of things over the years that I have stated I want to help others live their best lives and learn from the things that I have learned, because I didn't unfortunately have that much before me.
Well, thank you so much for coming. I'm sure all of our listeners will learn something that they take away from this podcast about how to climb an alternative peak after you experience an unexpected trauma in your life. So, again, thank you so much for joining, and I will talk with you later. Thank you so much for tuning in to listen to Life Gets Mo Crazy. I hope you learned some new ways to recover from struggle and climb an alternative peak by listening to this episode. If you loved it, please subscribe to the podcast and share with your family and friends. If you would like to follow me, Jamie Mo Crazy, you can find me on all social media platforms at Jamie Mo Crazy or hashtag Mo Crazy Strong. Each episode is the last Friday of every month, so go be Mo Crazy Strong until our next episode.